He left his pregnant fiancée in the rain, claiming this baby isn't mine, but he had no idea a billionaire was watching. Hi, my beautiful family. May the Almighty bless every woman with unwavering strength, endless grace, and a heart that shines with divine love. May He honor the mothers who nurture, the sisters who guide, the wives who stand steadfast, and the daughters who fill our homes with light. May no woman ever feel ignored, undervalued, or weak, for in God's eyes, she is a queen, a pillar, and the heartbeat of every family. My dear family, remember that true greatness lies in how we respect, cherish, and honor the women who shape our lives. Without their love and wisdom, the world would lose its beauty, its soul, and its meaning. Protect them, value them, and hold them like treasures beyond measure. If your heart is true, write, present. If your love is real, write, I am with Mr. Peter. In the heaviest rain, she discovered that some strangers have the warmest hearts. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Henry Morrison's penthouse like bullets of ice, each drop echoing the terror pounding in Naomi Williams' chest. She stood in the center of his marble-floored living room, her hands trembling as she clutched the pregnancy test behind her back. At 28, she had imagined this moment would be filled with joy and celebration. Instead, fear crawled up her spine like winter frost. "Henry," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm, "I need to tell you something important." Henry Morrison, 32 and worth $47 million from his tech company, stood with his back to her, staring out at the city lights blurred by rain. His shoulders were rigid beneath his expensive Italian suit, and when he turned around, his ice-blue eyes held none of the warmth she had fallen in love with 2 years ago. "What is it, Naomi?" "I have calls to make to Tokyo in an hour." She took a shaking breath, pulling the test from behind her back. "I'm pregnant, Henry. We're going to have a baby." The silence that followed was deafening. Henry's face went through a series of emotions, shock, disbelief, and then something that made Naomi's blood turn cold: rage. "Pregnant?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "How convenient. What do you mean convenient?" Naomi stepped forward, confusion mixing with hurt. "Henry, this is our child. Our baby." "Our baby?" Henry laughed, but there was no humor in it. The sound was sharp and cruel, cutting through the air like broken glass. "Naomi, I've been traveling for business 3 weeks out of every month for the past 4 months. The math doesn't add up, but you were here in August. That child is not mine." Henry's voice exploded through the penthouse, his words hitting her like physical blows. His face had transformed into something she didn't recognize, twisted with suspicion and fury. "I knew this would happen eventually. A woman like you, from where you came from, was bound to try and trap me." The words hung in the air like poison. Naomi felt as if the ground had opened beneath her feet. "A woman like me? Henry, what are you saying?" "You know exactly what I'm saying. Did you really think I'd be stupid enough to fall for this? You probably planned this whole thing. Get pregnant by some other man and try to pin it on the millionaire. Well, congratulations, Naomi. Your plan failed." Tears began streaming down her face, hot against her cold cheeks. "Henry, please. You know me. You know I would never—" "Do I?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Because the woman I thought I knew wouldn't have tried to trap me with another man's baby." "Stop saying that." Naomi's voice cracked with desperation. "This baby is yours. I've never been with anyone else since we've been together. How can you even think? Because I'm not an idiot, Naomi. Unlike you, I can count. And the numbers don't lie." The argument escalated, their voices rising above the thunder outside. Henry accused her of being a gold digger, of planning this deception from the beginning. Each word was like a dagger to her heart, destroying everything she thought they had built together. Her hands shook as she tried to defend herself, to make him see reason, but his pride and suspicion had blinded him completely. "Get out," he said finally, his voice cold as winter. "Take your lies and your schemes and get out of my home. Henry, please, get out." Naomi stumbled backward, the pregnancy test falling from her trembling fingers and clattering onto the marble floor. The sound echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. She looked at the man she had planned to marry, the man she thought she knew, and saw a stranger wearing his face. Without another word, she turned and ran toward the door, grabbing her coat from the chair. The rain outside was torrential, but she didn't care. She needed to get away from those words, from the hatred in his eyes, from the complete destruction of everything she had believed in. The moment she stepped outside, the rain soaked through her thin coat within seconds. The cold was shocking, making her gasp, but she kept walking, stumbling down the street with tears and rain mixing on her face. The weight of his accusations, the cruelty of his dismissal, the complete shattering of her dreams, it all crashed down on her at once. Her chest felt tight. She couldn't breathe properly. The stress, the shock, the emotional trauma, it was too much. Black spots began dancing in her vision as she struggled to keep walking. Her legs felt weak, unsteady. And then the world tilted. Naomi collapsed onto the wet pavement, her consciousness slipping away as the rain continued to pour down on her motionless form. In her last moment of awareness, she felt the cold mud seeping through her clothes and wondered if this was how everything would end. That's when she heard footsteps running toward her. Felix. Nash had been walking home from his job at the community center when he saw the woman fall. Without a moment's hesitation, he dropped his umbrella and ran to her side. She was unconscious, rain pouring over her face, her dark skin pale with shock. "Hey, miss! Miss, can you hear me?" Felix knelt in the mud beside her, not caring about his simple jeans and sweater getting soaked. When she didn't respond, he carefully lifted her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt. She was beautiful even in unconsciousness, with high cheekbones and full lips. Her natural hair plastered to her head by the rain. Felix carried her through the storm, his 30-year-old frame strong. From years of physical work he didn't need to do but chose to do anyway. He lived only 3 blocks away in a modest apartment, a far cry from the mansion he actually owned across the city. But that life, that wealth, that empire, he had walked away from it all 2 years ago to find something real. As he carried the unconscious woman to safety, Felix had no idea that he was holding in his arms the other half of his soul, or that this moment would change everything for both of them. "You're safe now," he whispered as he reached his front door, fumbling with his keys while still holding her. "I've got you." The rain continued to fall, but for the first time that night, someone was truly sheltered from the storm. Chapter 2. Gentle hands, caring heart. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in kindness. Consciousness returned to Naomi slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark lake. The first thing she noticed was warmth, blessed, surrounding warmth that seemed impossible after the ice-cold rain. The second thing was softness beneath her body, completely different from the hard pavement where she had collapsed. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself lying on a clean bed in a small, simply furnished room. Sunlight streamed through modest curtains, revealing walls painted a calming sage green and a single bookshelf filled with well-worn novels. The scent of something cooking drifted from what she assumed was a kitchen nearby. "You're awake." The voice was gentle, concerned, and came from a chair beside the bed where a man sat watching her with kind brown eyes. "How are you feeling?" Naomi tried to sit up, then immediately regretted it as dizziness washed over her. The man, tall with sandy brown hair and wearing simple jeans and a grey sweater, immediately stood to steady her. "Easy," he said softly. "You've been through a lot. Just rest." "Where? Where am I?" Naomi's voice came out as a whisper, her throat dry and rough. "My apartment. I'm Felix Nash." He moved to a small table and returned with a glass of water. "I found you collapsed in the rain last night. You were unconscious, so I brought you here to get you warm and dry." The memories came flooding back. Henry's accusations, his cruel words, the rain, the collapse. Fresh tears sprang to Naomi's eyes as the pain hit her all over again. "Hey," Felix said, sitting back down in the chair. His voice was incredibly gentle. "You're safe now. Rest. Don't cry anymore." Naomi looked at this stranger who had saved her, really looked at him for the first time. He appeared to be about 30, with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of honest work. His clothes were simple but clean, and there was something about his presence that felt inherently trustworthy. "Why did you help me?"
she asked, wiping her eyes. "Why wouldn't I?"
Felix's response was immediate, as if the question itself was puzzling. "You needed help." It was then that Naomi noticed his clothes from the night before, hanging on a small drying rack near the window, soaked jeans and a sweater that was still damp despite hanging all night. He had carried her through that storm without any protection for himself, getting completely drenched to save a stranger. "You got soaked," she said, guilt washing over her. Felix followed her gaze and shrugged. "Clothes dry." "You could have been seriously hurt out there." The simple, matter-of-fact way he said it, as if risking his own comfort for a stranger was the most natural thing in the world, made something warm bloom in Naomi's chest, a feeling she had almost forgotten existed. "I should go," she said, trying again to sit up. "I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing, and you're not going anywhere until you've eaten something, and I'm sure you're okay." Felix stood up, and she caught sight of a fresh bandage on his hand. "Stay put. I'll bring you breakfast." "Your hand. It's nothing," he said. But she could see the slight wince as he moved his fingers. 10 minutes later, Felix returned with a tray holding scrambled eggs, toast, fresh fruit, and orange juice. The eggs were slightly burned around the edges, and when he set the tray down, she noticed him favor his bandaged hand. "You burned yourself cooking," she realized, her heart clenching. "Just a little." Felix sat back down in the chair, watching as she took a tentative bite. "How is it?" The eggs were indeed slightly overcooked, but they were made with care, and after the emotional devastation of the night before, they tasted like the most comforting meal she'd ever had. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. Felix smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him, and the warmth of it reached his eyes. "Good. You need your strength." As Naomi ate, Felix told her he worked at a community center helping with after-school programs for kids. He spoke about his work with genuine passion, describing how he taught children to garden and helped with their homework. There was something about the way he talked about serving others that felt familiar, yet entirely foreign to her world of wealth and privilege. "What about you?" Felix asked gently. "Do you want to talk about what happened last night?" Naomi hesitated, then found herself telling him everything, about Henry, about the pregnancy, about the accusations and the cruelty. Felix listened without judgment, his expression growing more concerned with each detail. He said the baby wasn't his. Felix's voice carried a note of disbelief. "He travels a lot for business, and he convinced himself that the timing doesn't work out. But it does." Naomi's hand instinctively moved to her still flat stomach. "I've never been with anyone else. Not since we've been together." "I believe you," Felix said simply, and the immediate, unwavering certainty in his voice made Naomi's eyes fill with tears again. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." Felix leaned forward, his brown eyes serious. "I know you're telling the truth. I can see it in your eyes. And I know that any man who would leave you in the rain while you're carrying his child is a fool who doesn't deserve you." The fierce protectiveness in his voice surprised them both. Felix seemed almost shocked that he had spoken so passionately, running a hand through his hair with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he said. It makes me angry that someone treated you that way." "Don't apologize," Naomi said softly. "It's been a long time since anyone defended me." After breakfast, Felix insisted on taking her to a doctor to make sure both she and the baby were okay after her collapse. At the clinic, he sat beside her in the waiting room, and when they called her name, he stood to go with her. "You don't have to," she began. "I want to make sure you're both okay," he said simply. In the examination room, when the doctor turned on the ultrasound machine and the rapid, strong heartbeat of her baby filled the room, Naomi felt tears of relief stream down her face. The baby was healthy, developing normally, and due in late May, exactly 9 months from when she and Henry had been together in August. Felix held her hand through the entire appointment, his thumb gently stroking her knuckles when the emotional weight of hearing her baby's heartbeat became overwhelming. For the first time since Henry's betrayal, Naomi smiled, really, truly smiled. That night, exhaustion from the emotional roller coaster of the last 24 hours hit her hard. Felix had insisted she stay another night, setting up the couch for himself despite her protests. Around 2 in the morning, she woke from a restless sleep and saw him lying on the floor beside her bed, using his jacket as a pillow. "Felix," she whispered. "Just making sure you're okay," he whispered back. "Go back to sleep. You don't have to sleep on the floor." "Yes, I do." Naomi lay there in the darkness, listening to his steady breathing, and realized that this man, this stranger who had saved her from the storm, was guarding her sleep like a silent protector. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. Outside, the rain had stopped. But inside Felix's modest apartment, something beautiful was beginning to grow. Chapter 3. Love in Simple Gestures. The smallest acts of service often carry the greatest love. 3 weeks had passed since the night Felix carried Naomi through the storm, and she had been staying with him while she figured out her next steps. What had begun as temporary shelter was slowly becoming something neither of them had expected, a deep, growing connection built on kindness, respect, and an intimacy that had nothing to do with physical desire and everything to do with the meeting of two souls. Each morning, Felix would wake before dawn to make her breakfast, carefully avoiding anything that might trigger her morning sickness. He had researched pregnancy nutrition and made sure she had prenatal vitamins, fresh fruits, and plenty of water. When she protested that she could cook for herself, he would smile and say, "Let me take care of you. You're taking care of someone else right now." Today was different, though. Today was Naomi's 29th birthday, and she had mentioned it to Felix only in passing 3 days ago. She didn't expect him to remember. Henry had forgotten her birthday the previous year, too busy with a business merger to acknowledge the day she was born. Felix had left early that morning for work, kissing her forehead gently before heading out the door. It was a gesture that had become routine between them, tender and protective, without crossing any boundaries. Naomi had told herself repeatedly that her growing feelings for this man were just gratitude, just the natural response to his kindness during her time of need. But deep down, she knew it was so much more. Around noon, Felix returned home with several shopping bags, which he quickly hid in his bedroom before she could see what was inside. He seemed nervous, excited, running his hands through his hair the way he did when he was trying to work up courage for something. "I thought we could take a walk this afternoon," he suggested. "There's a place I want to show you." An hour later, they were walking through a field of wildflowers just outside the city. Felix had borrowed a friend's car to drive them there, and now they moved slowly through the meadow, Naomi's hand resting lightly on his arm for support. Her pregnancy was showing now, a small but definite curve to her belly that made Felix's protective instincts even stronger. "This is beautiful," Naomi said, breathing in the sweet scent of the flowers. "How did you know about this place?" "I come here sometimes when I need to think," Felix replied. "It helps me remember what's important." They had been walking for about 20 minutes when Naomi felt her shoelace come undone. She looked down at her feet, then at her growing belly, calculating the awkwardness of trying to bend over. Before she could even attempt it, Felix was already kneeling in front of her, his hands gentle as he tied her shoelace with careful precision. The sight of this strong, kind man kneeling at her feet, taking care of such a simple need, made her heart flutter in a way she had never experienced before. "No queen should walk with untied laces," he said softly, looking up at her with those warm brown eyes. "Queen?" Naomi laughed, but her voice was slightly breathless. I'm hardly a queen. Felix stood slowly, his gaze never leaving hers. You are to me. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Naomi felt her cheeks warm under his intense gaze, and for a moment, the rest of the world seemed to disappear. Felix, she began, but he stepped back, running his hand through his hair again. Come on, he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. There's more to see. They spent the afternoon in the meadow, talking about everything and nothing. Felix told her about his childhood, about growing up with parents who valued service over wealth, about his decision to work with children because they saw the world with such pure hearts. Naomi found herself sharing things she had never told anyone. Her dreams of becoming a writer, her fears about motherhood, her growing realization that her relationship with Henry had been built on all the wrong foundations. As the sun began to set, Felix pulled a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. I know it's not much, he said, suddenly shy, but I wanted to give you something for your birthday. Naomi unwrapped the gift with trembling fingers. Inside was a small leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover in gold. For your writing, Felix explained. You mentioned wanting to write down your thoughts, maybe write stories for the baby when he or she is older. Naomi stared at the journal, tears filling her eyes. It wasn't expensive. She could see that it came from a simple bookstore, not some luxury boutique. But it was perfect. It was thoughtful. It was exactly what she needed. Felix, this is... She looked up at him, struggling to find words. This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. Really? Really? She stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek, letting her lips linger against his skin for just a moment longer than friendship would dictate. Thank you. When she pulled back, Felix's eyes were dark with an emotion she couldn't quite name. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. Naomi, he whispered, and she could hear the restraint in his voice, the careful control he was maintaining. I know, she whispered back, understanding his internal struggle. I know this is complicated. You're vulnerable right now. You're pregnant and hurt, and I've never felt safer with anyone in my entire life, she finished. Felix, I know the timing isn't ideal, but what I feel for you, it's real. They stood there in the field of flowers as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, both of them acknowledging the love growing between them while also recognizing the complexity of the situation. That evening, back at Felix's apartment, Naomi couldn't sleep. The pregnancy was making her restless, and her mind was full of thoughts about Felix, about the baby, about the uncertain future ahead of them. She got up to get a glass of water and found Felix sitting at his small kitchen table, reading by lamplight. Can't sleep either, he asked, looking up from his book. The baby's active tonight, she said, settling into the chair across from him. What are you reading? Felix showed her the cover, a collection of poetry by Maya Angelou. Would you like me to read to you? Sometimes poetry helps quiet the mind. Naomi nodded and Felix began to read. His voice was deep and soothing, and the words of the poetry washed over her like a gentle tide. As he read poem after poem, she felt her restlessness ease, replaced by a deep sense of peace and contentment. When she finally began to drift off in her chair, Felix carried her to bed, tucking her in with the same gentle care he showed her every day. Sweet dreams. Naomi, he whispered, kissing her forehead. Just before sleep claimed her, she felt the baby kick strongly. Felix's hand was still resting on her shoulder, and she took it gently, placing it on her belly just as the baby kicked again. Felix's sharp intake of breath told her he had felt it. When she opened her eyes, she saw tears streaming down his face. I felt him, he whispered in wonder. Or her. I felt the baby move. Felix, Naomi said softly, covering his hand with hers. I want you to know, whatever happens, however this all works out, I will never forget your kindness. I will never forget how you saved us. Felix leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. I'll protect you both, he whispered fiercely. Even if it costs my life, I'll protect you both. In that moment, lying in the quiet darkness with Felix's hand on her belly and his promise in her ears, Naomi knew with absolute certainty that she had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with this man who had chosen kindness over everything. The question now was whether love would be enough to overcome all the obstacles. Ahead, Chapter 4, Love Interrupted. Sometimes, love must wait for the perfect moment, but the heart can't wait forever. 2 months had passed since Naomi's birthday in the flower field, and the small apartment had become a sanctuary of growing love and quiet intimacy. Naomi was now 4 months pregnant. Her belly curved in a way that made Felix's protective instincts surge every time he looked at her. They had settled into a routine of domestic harmony that felt more precious than any luxury either had known. Felix working at the community center during the day, while Naomi wrote in her journal and rested, then spending their evenings cooking together, reading, and talking about everything from philosophy to their dreams for the future. The winter months had transformed their relationship from grateful affection into something deeper and more profound. Felix would wake before dawn just to watch Naomi sleep, marveling at the peaceful expression on her face and the way her hand always found its way to her growing belly, even in dreams. She had begun to show him pieces of her writing, beautiful, heartfelt stories about second chances and unexpected love that made him understand the depth of her intelligence and creativity in ways that took his breath away. Felix had been carrying a small ring in his pocket for 3 weeks now. It wasn't an expensive diamond. He was living on his community center salary, after all. But it was beautiful in its simplicity, a white gold band with a small, clear stone that caught the light like captured starlight. He had spent hours in the jewelry store, explaining to the patient salesman that he needed something perfect for a woman who deserved the world, but would appreciate the thought more than the price tag. The ring represented everything he wanted to offer her. His whole heart, his unwavering devotion, his promise to love her and their child for the rest of his life. He had planned 3 different proposals already, but each time something had gone wrong, as if the universe itself was testing his determination to make this moment as perfect as she deserved. Today was attempt number 4, and Felix was determined that this time nothing would stop him from asking the woman he loved to be his wife. He had prepared everything carefully, like a general planning a campaign. Dinner was cooking in the slow cooker. Naomi's favorite chicken and vegetable stew that wouldn't trigger her pregnancy nausea, seasoned with herbs he had grown himself on their tiny balcony. Candles were hidden in his bedroom, ready to be arranged around the small dining table that he had polished until it gleamed. Fresh flowers, not expensive roses, but simple daisies from the corner market that reminded him of the field where they had shared her birthday, waited in a mason jar by the window. The ring was in his pocket, and he had practiced his speech so many times he could recite it in his sleep. Each word had been chosen with care, each phrase crafted to express the magnitude of what she meant to him. I love you, Naomi Williams, he whispered to himself as he stirred the stew, his voice carrying all the devotion in his heart. I love your strength, your kindness, your beautiful mind. I love how you've made this little apartment feel like home. I love watching you write in the journal I gave you, and I love how you sing to the baby when you think I'm not listening. I love the way you laugh at my terrible jokes, and the way you make even the simplest moments feel like magic. Will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and a father to your child? The words felt right in his mouth, filled with truth and hope, and a love so profound it sometimes overwhelmed him. Tonight would be the night. He was sure of it. Naomi returned from her afternoon walk just as the sun was beginning to set, her cheeks flushed from the cool December air, and her eyes bright with the contentment that had become her constant companion. She looked radiant in a way that took Felix's breath away. Pregnancy suited her, making her skin glow and her dark eyes shine with an inner light that seemed to illuminate everything around her. "Something smells amazing," she said, hanging up her coat and moving to kiss his cheek in the greeting that had become their daily ritual. The simple touch sent electricity through Felix's entire body, as it did every time she was near him. "Your favorite," Felix replied, catching her hand as she moved past him and bringing it to his lips for a gentle kiss. "Naomi, I was thinking, would you like to have dinner by candlelight tonight? Something special?" She raised an eyebrow, smiling with the playful expression that had captured his heart from the very beginning. "What's the occasion?" "Do I need an occasion to want to make dinner special for the woman I love?" The casual way he said it, "the woman I love," still made her heart skip beats, even though they had been saying those words to each other for weeks now. The love between them had grown naturally, inevitably, like flowers turning toward the sun, and yet it never lost its power to surprise her with its intensity. "No," she said softly, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him properly, her lips soft and warm against his. "No occasion needed." An hour later, Felix had arranged the candles around their small table with the precision of an artist, their flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls and filling the apartment with warm, golden light. He had served the stew with fresh bread he had picked up from the bakery and opened a bottle of sparkling cider that sparkled like champagne in their mismatched glasses. Naomi was telling him about her afternoon walk, how she had stopped by the small bookstore where he had bought her journal and discovered they had an entire section dedicated to children's literature. Her face was animated with excitement as she described the beautiful illustrated books she had found, the stories she was already imagining reading to their child. "I was thinking about what kind of stories I want to share with the baby," she was saying, her hand resting on her belly in the unconscious gesture that had become second nature. "There are so many beautiful books about love and kindness and the magic that exists in ordinary moments. I want our child to grow up believing in wonder, believing that love really can conquer anything." Felix felt his heart swell with emotion as he listened to her talk about their future, about the child they would raise together and the values they would instill. This was the moment. She was talking about their future as a family, about the love they shared, about the wonder she saw in the world. It was perfect. He reached into his pocket, his fingers closing around the small velvet box that contained his hopes and dreams for their life together. "Naomi," he began, his voice suddenly nervous despite all his practice. "These past few months with you have been—" She stopped mid-sentence, her face suddenly pale as a sheet. Her hand pressed against her forehead, and she swayed slightly in her chair, like a flower bending in a strong wind. "Naomi," Felix was on his feet immediately, moving to her side with the quick reflexes of a man whose every instinct was focused on protecting her. "What's wrong?" I feel dizzy all of a sudden." She pressed her hand to her forehead, her breathing becoming shallow and rapid. "Everything is spinning." The ring in Felix's pocket was completely forgotten as he knelt beside her, his hands steady on her shoulders while his mind raced through everything he knew about pregnancy complications. "Let's get you to the couch. Come on, easy does it." He helped her to the living room, settling her on the couch with pillows behind her back and her feet elevated, his movements gentle but efficient. The proposal, the perfect moment he had planned, none of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was making sure she and the baby were okay. "I'm sure it's nothing," Naomi said, but her voice was shaky and uncertain. "Just pregnancy stuff. Low blood sugar, maybe. We should call the doctor," Felix said, already reaching for his phone, with hands that trembled slightly with worry. "Felix, I'm fine, really. It's probably just because I didn't eat much at lunch. I was too excited about finding those books." But Felix was already dialing, and within 20 minutes they were at the emergency clinic. The doctor assured them that dizzy spells were common in the second trimester, especially if blood sugar dropped too low. But Felix didn't relax until they were back home, and Naomi was resting comfortably with a full meal in her stomach. His first proposal attempt had been a complete failure. But as he watched over Naomi that night, Felix realized he cared more about her well-being than any perfect romantic moment. Love, he understood, wasn't about flawless proposals. It was about choosing her safety and happiness over his own desires every single time. 2 weeks later, Felix tried again. This time, he planned a simple picnic in the flower field where they had shared Naomi's birthday, the place where he had first understood that what he felt for her was deeper than anything he had ever experienced. The weather was unusually warm for mid-December, one of those unexpected gift days that winter sometimes offers, and Naomi was feeling much better. Her energy had returned, and the color was back in her cheeks. They spread a thick blanket among the dormant flower stalks, the field quiet and peaceful under the pale winter sun. Felix had packed sandwiches and hot chocolate from a thermos, along with the small cakes Naomi loved from the bakery near the community center. Everything was perfect. The setting, the weather, her mood, the way she looked at him, with those dark eyes full of love and trust. Felix waited until they had finished eating, then took Naomi's hands in his, feeling the strength and warmth of her fingers intertwined with his. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "Naomi," he began, his voice steady despite the racing of his heart. "These past few months with you have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she said softly, her eyes searching his face with an expression of such love that it took his breath away. "I know the situation is complicated, and I know we haven't been together very long in the traditional sense. But what I feel for you—" He paused, struggling to find words adequate to express the magnitude of his love. "I've never felt anything like this before. You've changed everything for me, Felix," she whispered, and he could see in her eyes that she knew what was coming. "I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy," he continued, beginning to reach into his pocket for the ring. "I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night. I want to raise our child together and maybe have more children someday. I want—" Suddenly, the baby kicked with surprising and unusual force, causing Naomi to gasp and laugh at the same time. The movement was so strong that Felix could actually see it through her sweater, a clear outline of a tiny foot or elbow pressing against her belly. "Oh my goodness," she said, pressing both hands to her belly with wonder and delight. "Did you feel that? That was the strongest kick yet. Felix, put your hand here. I think the baby is trying to say something." Felix had indeed felt it. The baby had kicked right where his hand had been resting on her belly, and the movement was so strong, so distinctly human, that it brought tears to his eyes immediately. This was their child, healthy and active and growing stronger every day. "He's getting stronger," Felix said, his voice full of wonder as he felt another powerful kick against his palm. "Or she," Naomi laughed, and the moment was so beautiful, so perfect in its own way, that Felix found himself laughing too, instead of continuing with his proposal. They spent the rest of the afternoon feeling the baby move, marveling at each kick and roll and hiccup, talking about whether they wanted to know the baby's gender or wait for the surprise. The love Felix felt in that moment, not just for Naomi, but for their unborn child, was so overwhelming that he realized some moments were too precious to interrupt with anything else, even declarations of eternal devotion. His third attempt came a week before Christmas, and this time Felix was determined that nothing would distract him from his purpose. He had planned to propose by the lake, just outside town, where they often went to watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The ring was in his pocket again, and this time he was determined nothing would stop him from asking the question that had been burning in his heart for weeks. They had been sitting on their favorite bench by the water for about 30 minutes, talking about their hopes for the new year and watching the sun sink slowly toward the horizon. Naomi was bundled in a thick coat that couldn't quite hide her growing belly, and her cheeks were pink from the cold air. She looked beautiful and peaceful, and Felix knew this was the moment. "Naomi, there's something I want to ask you," he said, reaching into his pocket for the ring with hands that shook slightly from nerves rather than cold. "Yes?" She turned to face him with complete attention, and he was struck again by how beautiful she was, how much he loved her, how lucky he was to have found her. "I want to ask you to—" The first rumble of thunder interrupted his words, deep and ominous in the distance. They both looked up at the sky, which had been clear just minutes before, but was now dark, with rapidly approaching storm clouds that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. "Oh no," Naomi said, struggling to stand from the bench with the careful movements of a pregnant woman. "We need to get to the car before this hits." The first fat raindrops began to fall just as Felix helped her up, and by the time they made it to the car, they were both soaked to the skin. Felix had to grip the ring tightly to keep it from slipping from his wet fingers as they ran through the suddenly fierce downpour. As they drove home through the storm, Naomi laughed about their terrible luck with weather, completely unaware of how close she had come to receiving a proposal. "Maybe we're destined to always be caught in storms," she said, reaching over to squeeze his hand as rain hammered against the windshield. "As long as we're caught in them together," Felix replied. But inwardly, he was starting to wonder if the universe was trying to tell him something about timing and patience. His fourth attempt came a week later, on New Year's Eve. This time, Felix decided to keep it simple and intimate. He would propose at home, at their own front door, with no elaborate settings or perfect conditions required. Just him, her, and the love they shared. That would be enough. Naomi had spent the day writing in her journal, documenting the milestones of her pregnancy and her feelings about becoming a mother. She was 5 months along now, clearly showing, and Felix loved watching her talk to the baby as she wrote, her voice soft and loving as she shared her thoughts about the future. As midnight approached, they stood on the small balcony of the apartment, watching fireworks bloom like flowers in the distance and listening to the sounds of celebration echoing across the city. Felix's hand closed around the ring in his pocket one more time, and he felt a sense of calm certainty settle over him. "Naomi," he said, taking her hand and marveling at how perfectly it fit in his, "I know this year has been unexpected for both of us." "The best kind of unexpected," she said, smiling up at him with the radiant expression that made him fall in love with her all over again every single day. "I want to start this new year by asking you something important." Felix took a deep breath, then slowly dropped to one knee right there on their small balcony, pulling out the ring that represented all his hopes for their future. "Naomi Williams, I love you more than I ever knew it was possible to love someone. I love your strength, your courage, your beautiful heart. I love—" The sound of a car door slamming in the parking lot below interrupted him, sharp and violent, in the quiet night. Then footsteps on the stairs, heavy and determined. Then a voice calling Naomi's name, a voice that made her blood run cold and her hand instinctively move to protect her belly. "Naomi, I know you're up there." Henry Morrison stood at the bottom of the apartment building, looking up at their balcony with fury written across his face. Even from the 3rd floor, they could see the desperation and rage in his posture, the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Felix rose slowly to his feet, still holding the ring, his jaw tight with protective anger that he struggled to control. After all these months of peace and happiness, after building a life together based on love and trust and mutual respect, the past had finally caught up with them. "How did he find us?" Naomi whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her belly as fear and adrenaline flooded her system. "I don't know," Felix said grimly, slipping the ring back into his pocket as the sound of footsteps on the stairs grew louder. "But I'm not letting him hurt you again." The sound of Henry's approach grew more insistent, more desperate, and Felix realized that his fourth proposal attempt was about to become something much more complicated and dangerous than a simple declaration of love. As they stood there on the balcony, holding each other against the cold and the approaching storm of Henry's fury, Felix made a silent promise that whatever happened next, he would protect the woman he loved and their unborn child at any cost. The proposal would have to wait, but his commitment to her never would. Chapter: If the past returns. The past never stays buried when pride refuses to let it rest. Henry. Morrison's fist pounded against the apartment door with the force of barely controlled rage. It was past midnight on New Year's Day, and his expensive suit was wrinkled from what appeared to be hours of searching. His usually perfectly styled blonde hair was disheveled, and his ice-blue eyes held a manic intensity that made Felix step protectively in front of Naomi. The sound echoed through the small apartment like gunshots, each impact more violent than the last. Felix could see the neighbors' lights flickering on through the thin walls, could hear the muffled complaints from the unit next door. But Henry seemed oblivious to everything except his desperate need to reach Naomi. "Naomi!" Henry's voice carried through the thin door, loud enough to wake the neighbors. "I know you're in there. Open this door right now. We need to talk." Naomi's face had gone pale, her hand pressed against her belly as if to shield her unborn child from the violence in Henry's voice. She was 5 months pregnant now, visibly and beautifully so, and the sight of her obvious pregnancy seemed to only fuel Henry's fury when Felix finally opened the door. "You need to leave," Felix said calmly, blocking the doorway with his body. He was slightly shorter than Henry, but broader through the shoulders, and there was a quiet strength in his posture that spoke of a man who would not be easily moved. "Who the hell are you?" Henry's gaze raked over Felix's simple clothes, jeans and a sweater that had seen better days. Up close, Felix could smell the alcohol on Henry's breath, could see the red-rimmed eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and desperate searching. "Are you the one who's been hiding my fiancé?" "Ex-fiancé," Naomi said from behind Felix, her voice stronger than she felt. "And I'm not hiding. I left Henry. There's a difference." Henry tried to push past Felix, but the other man held firm, his body a wall of quiet determination. "You can't just disappear for 6 months, Naomi. Do you have any idea what you've put me through? The humiliation. The questions from my business partners about where my pregnant fiancé went. I've had to cancel 3 major deals because investors think I can't handle my personal life." "So this is about your reputation," Felix observed, his voice dangerously quiet, "not about her well-being." "Don't you dare lecture me about her well-being," Henry snarled, his composure finally cracking completely. "I've spent the last 6 months hiring the best private investigators in the city, checking hospitals, morgues, wondering if she was dead somewhere because of what I said. This is none of your business." Felix studied Henry's face, seeing the genuine anguish beneath the rage. This wasn't just wounded pride. This was a man who had been tormented by the possibility that his cruel words had led to something terrible. "What are you? Some kind of charity case she picked up?" Henry continued, his voice becoming more desperate. "Let me guess. You think you're in love with her? You think she actually cares about you?" "I know she does," Felix replied simply. Henry laughed, but there was no humor in it, only the bitter sound of a man whose world had collapsed around him. "Oh, you poor, pathetic fool. Do you have any idea who she is? What she comes from? Naomi Williams isn't some struggling single mother who needs to be rescued. She's—" "Enough," Naomi interrupted, stepping around Felix to face Henry directly. The months of peace and love had given her a strength she didn't know she possessed. "You don't get to tell him who I am. You don't get to say anything about my life anymore." For the first time, Henry really looked at her, really saw her. She was glowing with health and happiness, her pregnancy making her curves more pronounced, her dark skin radiant. Her hair, which she had always worn straight for him, now fell in natural curls around her shoulders. and she looked nothing like the broken, desperate woman who had left his penthouse 6 months ago. "You look—" Henry's voice faltered for a moment, something like regret flickering across his features. "You look beautiful, Naomi, more beautiful than I've ever seen you." The admission seemed to pain him, as if seeing her happiness without him was a physical wound. "She's always been beautiful," Felix said. "You were just too blind to see it." Henry's attention snapped back to Felix, and his expression hardened again. "And I suppose you think you're the man to take care of her. What do you do for work? What can you possibly offer her?" "Love," Felix answered without hesitation. "Respect, loyalty, things that apparently don't come with your bank account. Love doesn't pay for hospital bills. Love doesn't provide for a child. What are you, some kind of social worker? Construction worker?" Henry's voice dripped with disdain as he took in Felix's calloused hands and simple clothes. "Look at this place. 1 bedroom, probably 800 square feet. Is this really where you want to raise my child?" "I work at a community center," Felix said proudly. "I help children." Henry's laughter was cruel and loud enough to echo off the walls. "A community center? Oh, this is rich. Naomi, please tell me you're not actually serious about this man. He can't give you anything. He can't provide for you or the baby. He's nobody. He's the man who carried me through a storm when you left me in the rain," Naomi said, her voice carrying a strength that made both men look at her with surprise. "He's the man who held my hand during doctor's appointments. He's the man who reads poetry to me when I can't sleep and cooks for me every morning and treats me like I'm precious." "Precious?" Henry's face twisted with disbelief. "Naomi, you're being ridiculous. You're hormonal and emotional and not thinking clearly. This little domestic fantasy you're playing, living in poverty with a man who makes less in a year than I spend on wine, is the happiest I've ever been in my life," she finished. The words hit Henry like a physical blow. He had expected to find her struggling, desperate, ready to come crawling back to him. Instead, she was thriving in a way he had never seen before. "The baby," Henry said suddenly, his gaze dropping to her belly. His voice cracked with emotion. "Is it yours?" Naomi confirmed, her hand moving protectively over her stomach. "Due in late May, just like the math you refused to do 6 months ago would have told you." Henry stared at her pregnant form, and for a moment his carefully controlled facade cracked completely. 6 months, he whispered. "You've been gone for 6 months, and I had people looking for you. Private investigators. I thought maybe something had happened to you. I thought I'd killed you with my words." "You thought I was dead?" Naomi asked, and there was something in her voice that might have been hurt. "I thought—" Henry ran his hands through his hair, suddenly looking older than his 32 years. "I don't know what I thought. I was angry and scared, and I said things I shouldn't have said. But Naomi, this—" He gestured around the modest apartment with genuine desperation. "This isn't the life you're meant to have." "How would you know what life I'm meant to have?" she asked. "You never bothered to ask me what I wanted when we were together. I gave you everything. Jewelry, clothes, trips to Paris, things," Felix said quietly. "You gave her things." Henry's attention swung back to Felix, and this time there was genuine hatred in his eyes. "And what have you given her? Love in a 1-bedroom apartment? Romance with a man who can't even afford to properly feed her?" "I eat better here than I ever did in your penthouse," Naomi said. "Felix cooks for me. Real food, made with care, not just expensive takeout from restaurants where the waiters know your name." "You're living in a fantasy," Henry said, his voice becoming more desperate, more broken. "Naomi, come home with me. We can work this out. We can be a family. Our child deserves better than this. Our child deserves to be raised by people who love each other," Naomi replied. "People who choose kindness over cruelty. People who understand that wealth means nothing without character." Henry was quiet for a long moment, studying the two of them, the way Felix stood protectively beside Naomi, the way she leaned into his strength, the obvious love and devotion between them. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerously soft. "You think you know what you're doing," he said to Felix. "You think you're some kind of hero, saving the damsel in distress. But you have no idea what you're dealing with. Naomi isn't some poor little girl who needs rescuing." "She's tired," Naomi interrupted firmly. "I'm tired and it's late and you need to leave, Henry." "This isn't over," Henry said, but he was already backing toward the door. "This can't be over. That's my child you're carrying." "No," Felix said, stepping forward. "That's our child she's carrying. You gave up any rights to them the night you threw her out into the rain." Henry's face went white with rage, but something in Felix's calm certainty seemed to deflate his anger. He looked between them one more time, taking in their obvious happiness and unity, and for the first time in 6 months he began to understand what he had really lost. "I'll be back," he said finally. "This isn't over, Naomi." After the door closed behind him, Naomi collapsed into Felix's arms, shaking with the aftershock of the confrontation. Felix held her close, his hand stroking her hair as she cried against his chest. "He found us," she whispered. "How did he find us?" "I don't know," Felix said grimly, "but I'm not going to let him hurt you again. I promise." As he held the woman he loved, feeling their unborn child move between them, Felix made a silent vow that whatever Henry Morrison was planning, whatever resources he brought to bear against them, it wouldn't matter. Love would find a way to protect what was precious. The ring was still in his pocket, the proposal still unspoken, but somehow those things seemed less important now than the promise he was making to keep his family safe. Chapter 6. Her secret revealed. The greatest strength often hides behind the humblest face. 3 days after Henry's unexpected visit, life in the small apartment had taken on an undercurrent of tension that neither Felix nor Naomi could shake. Felix had installed new locks on both the front door and the sliding door to the balcony, had taken to checking the windows multiple times each evening, and had even arranged for a friend from the community center to walk Naomi to her doctor's appointments when he couldn't be there. Naomi found herself jumping at every unexpected sound, her hand constantly moving to her belly in a protective gesture that broke Felix's heart. The media attention from Henry's public appearances had been relentless. Reporters had somehow tracked down their address, and there were photographers stationed across the street at all hours, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious pregnant woman who had captured the heart of the Nash heir. Their quiet private life had become a circus, and the strain was showing on both of them. She was nearly 6 months pregnant now, and the baby's movements were strong and frequent throughout the day and night. Felix loved watching her face light up when the little one kicked, loved the way she would take his hand and place it on her belly so he could share in the miracle of new life growing inside her. But since Henry's visit, even those precious moments were tinged with worry about what the future might hold and how they could protect their growing family from the chaos swirling around them. It was on a quiet Thursday evening that everything changed. Naomi had fallen asleep early, exhausted by the emotional stress of the past few days and the physical demands of her advancing pregnancy. She had been having trouble sleeping, tossing and turning as the baby seemed to be most active during the night hours, and Felix had spent the previous evening rubbing her back and reading to her until she finally drifted off. Felix was in the kitchen, cleaning up from dinner, his mind occupied with thoughts of their future and the decisions they would soon have to make, when his phone rang. The ringtone was different from his usual one, a classical piece by Bach that was reserved for only one caller, a sound he hadn't heard in months. Nash residence. There came the voice of his family's longtime butler, Harrison. "Mr. Felix, your father has been trying to reach you. He says it's quite urgent." Felix glanced toward the bedroom where Naomi slept, her breathing deep and peaceful for the first time in days, then stepped out onto the small balcony to take the call privately. The night air was cool against his skin, and he could see the photographer's van still parked across the street, a reminder of how complicated their lives had become. "What does he want?" "Harrison," Felix asked, keeping his voice low. "The quarterly board meeting is next week, sir. Your presence is strongly requested by the board of directors. There are some significant business matters that require your input." Felix closed his eyes, rubbing his forehead with his free hand. "Tell him I'm still taking my leave of absence from the company. I made that clear when I left. So with respect, it's been over 2 years since you've attended a board meeting. The other directors are asking pointed questions about your commitment to the family business. There's talk of removing you from the succession plan if you don't return soon. My commitment is fine, Harrison. My priorities have just changed." Felix looked through the sliding door at the small apartment where Naomi slept. This simple, honest life he had built away from the Nash empire and all its complications. "Of course, sir, but there's something else. The Morrison Industries situation." Felix felt his stomach drop. "What about Morrison Industries?" "Your father says Henry Morrison has been making inquiries about the Nash family." "Personal inquiries? About you specifically, sir?" "He's been asking questions about your whereabouts, your current living situation." The implications hit Felix like a physical blow. If Henry was investigating him, it was only a matter of time before he discovered the truth about Felix's identity. And if Henry knew, he would use that information as a weapon. "Shall I tell your father you'll be attending the board meeting?" Harrison asked diplomatically. Felix looked through the sliding door at the small apartment where Naomi slept. This simple, honest life he had built away from the Nash empire and all its complications. Then he thought about Henry Morrison's threats, about the resources a millionaire like Henry could bring to bear against them, about the media circus that was already making their lives difficult. "Yes," Felix said quietly. "Tell him I'll be there." After hanging up, Felix stood on the balcony for a long time, looking out over the modest neighborhood he had come to call home. Tomorrow he would have to return to the world he had walked away from, the world of board meetings and business suits and decisions that affected thousands of people and billions of dollars. But tonight he was still just Felix, the community center worker, in love with a pregnant woman who thought he survived on a $30,000 a year salary. The weight of his deception pressed down on him like a physical burden. For 2 years, he had lived honestly in this simple life, but the foundation of his relationship with Naomi was built on a lie, or at least on a carefully constructed omission of truth. How could he explain that everything she believed about their financial situation was wrong? How could he tell her that the man she thought was struggling to make ends meet was actually worth more money than she could imagine? He was so lost in thought that he didn't hear Naomi wake up, didn't realize she had come looking for him until she was standing in the doorway to the balcony, her silhouette backlit by the soft light from the apartment. "Felix, is everything okay?" Her voice was soft with sleep, and she was wearing one of his oversized sweaters over her pajamas, her hand resting on her rounded belly. He turned, plastering on a smile that felt forced even to him. "Everything's fine. You should be sleeping. I heard you talking to someone." Naomi stepped onto the balcony, and Felix immediately moved to wrap his arms around her from behind, his hands resting on her belly where the baby was moving restlessly. "Work?" Something like that. The lie felt bitter in his mouth, but he couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. Not yet. Not when she was already stressed and worried about Henry's threats. They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, Felix breathing in the scent of her hair and trying to memorize this peaceful moment. But Naomi was more perceptive than he gave her credit for, and she could sense the tension in his body, the way his mind was racing even as he held her. "You're worried about Henry," she said. "It wasn't a question. I'm worried about what he might try to do," Felix admitted. "Men like him don't give up easily when they want something. Men like him." Felix hesitated, then said carefully, "Men with money and power, they're used to getting their way. They don't understand the word no." Naomi turned in his arms to face him, studying his face in the dim light from the apartment. "Felix, there's something I need to tell you about my past. About why Henry thinks he can just show up and demand I come back to him. Naomi, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She took his hands in hers, her dark eyes serious and filled with a mixture of love and fear. Because if we're going to face whatever comes next, you need to know the truth about who I am, about what I come from. But before she could continue, Felix's phone buzzed with a text message. He ignored it at first, but it buzzed again, then again in rapid succession. Finally, he glanced at the screen and saw Harrison's name. "I'm sorry," he said to Naomi. "Just let me—" The text message was simple but devastating. "Your father says it's urgent regarding the Morrison Industries situation. Henry Morrison knows about your true identity. He needs to speak with you tonight." Felix felt the blood drain from his face as the full implications hit him. Morrison Industries, Henry's company. His father knew about Henry somehow, which meant the corporate world and his personal life were about to collide in ways he had never imagined possible. "Felix?" Naomi's voice seemed to come from very far away. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The phone was ringing in his hand now, and this time it wasn't Harrison calling. It was his father directly, David Nash, CEO of Nash Global Industries, a man Felix hadn't spoken to in 3 months and had hoped not to speak to for 3 more. "I have to take this," Felix said, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. Felix Nash, his father's voice was crisp, authoritative, carrying the weight of a man who commanded a $50 billion empire and was accustomed to immediate obedience. "We need to talk now. Now." Felix glanced at Naomi, who was watching him with growing concern and confusion. "Morrison Industries is trying to acquire several of our smaller subsidiaries. Henry Morrison has been asking questions about you, son. Personal questions. He knows who you are, and he knows where you live. He's planning something, and we need to discuss our response strategy immediately." Felix's blood turned to ice as the full scope of Henry's plan became clear. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest he's planning something unpleasant for both you and the young woman you're living with. We need to discuss protective measures and legal options tonight." "I'll call you back," Felix said, ending the call before his father could respond. Naomi was staring at him now, her hands pressed against her belly, as if protecting the baby from whatever revelation was coming. She had heard enough of the conversation to know that something fundamental had just shifted in their world. "Felix," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who was that? And why did they call you Felix Nash?" There was no hiding it now. No way to keep living the simple life he had built away from his family's empire. Henry Morrison had shattered that peace just as surely as he had shattered everything else in Naomi's life. And now Felix would have to face the consequences of his deception. "That was my father," Felix said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of secrets he could no longer keep. "David Nash, CEO of Nash Global Industries." The name hit Naomi like a physical blow, and she actually stepped backward, her hand reaching for the doorframe to steady herself. Everyone knew Nash Global. It was one of the largest corporations in the country, with interests in everything from technology to renewable energy to real estate development. It was an empire that employed hundreds of thousands of people and influenced global markets. "Nash Global," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Felix, that company is worth $53 billion as of last quarter." Felix finished, the number falling from his lips like a stone. "And my father wants me to take over as CEO when he retires next year." Naomi sank into one of the small patio chairs, her mind reeling as she tried to process this information. You're a billionaire?" "Technically, yes, though I haven't touched the money in over 2 years. I've been living entirely on my community center salary, but you work at a community center. You live in this tiny apartment. You cook breakfast on a hot plate that barely works." Her voice trailed off as she tried to reconcile the man she thought she knew with this revelation. "Because I wanted to learn how to live without all of that," Felix said, kneeling in front of her chair and taking her hands in his. "Because I wanted to understand what it meant to serve others instead of just commanding them. Because I wanted to find someone who could love me for who I am, not what I have. Naomi stared at him, this man she thought she knew completely, and realized that everything she believed about their relationship had been built on a foundation she didn't understand. "You've been lying to me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, and the pain in those words cut Felix deeper than any physical wound could have. "No," Felix said firmly, his hands tightening on hers. "I've been living the life I chose. The money, the company, the empire, that's my inheritance, not my identity. Everything I've shown you, everything I've given you, that's who I really am. The money is just circumstance. But Felix, you have billions of dollars. You could have given us anything, everything. And instead, we've been living on your community center salary, worrying about grocery bills." "Because I wanted to earn your love," he interrupted, his voice passionate and desperate. "Not buy it. Because I've seen what money does to relationships, how it corrupts everything it touches. My parents' marriage was destroyed by wealth and power. I didn't want that for us." Naomi was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation and all its implications. The man she had fallen in love with, the humble community center worker who cooked for her and read her poetry, was actually one of the richest men in the country. Everything she thought she knew about their life together was suddenly called into question. Finally, she looked up at him with tears in her eyes, but there was something else there too, a growing understanding. Maybe even relief. "So when Henry said you were nobody," she said slowly. "You're actually one of the richest men in the country," Felix confirmed, "and his biggest business rival, though he didn't know it until now." The implications of this revelation hit them both at the same time like a lightning bolt. Henry Morrison, millionaire tech mogul, had just declared war on a man who could buy and sell his entire company without blinking. The personal had become political, and the stakes had just risen beyond anything either of them had imagined. "Oh my God," Naomi whispered, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "Felix, what have we gotten ourselves into?" Chapter 7. Rivals in Love and Wealth. Jealousy turns men into monsters, but love turns them into heroes. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Felix had barely slept, spending most of the night sitting by the window, watching for any sign of surveillance, while Naomi tossed restlessly beside him. The revelation of his true identity had created a tension between them that neither knew how to address, and the comfortable intimacy they had built over the past 6 months felt suddenly fragile. When his phone rang at 7 a.m., Felix recognized his father's number immediately. "Henry Morrison requested a meeting," David Nash said without preamble. "This morning. He knows who you are, and he wants to discuss what he calls a mutually beneficial arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Felix asked, stepping into the kitchen so he wouldn't wake Naomi. "The kind where he gets his pregnant ex-fiancée back, and we avoid what he's calling an embarrassing scandal about the Nash heir living in poverty with another man's woman." Felix's grip tightened on the phone. "He's threatening to go public?" It appears so. Morrison Industries' stock has been struggling since he lost several major contracts last quarter. He needs a distraction from his business failures, and apparently, a story about a secret billionaire love triangle is exactly the kind of media sensation he's looking for. Felix closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his family's empire settling back onto his shoulders. This was exactly what he had wanted to avoid, his personal life becoming tangled up in corporate warfare and public relations nightmares. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. "Come home," his father said simply. "Take your place in the company. Let us handle Morrison the way we handle all threats to the Nash family. And Naomi?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Son, I'm sure she's a lovely woman, but you have responsibilities that are bigger than one relationship. The Nash legacy is exactly what I walked away from 2 years ago," Felix interrupted. Dad, I'm not coming back to the company just to wage war against some jealous ex-boyfriend. Even if that jealous ex-boyfriend is threatening to destroy the woman you love? The question hung in the air between them, and Felix realized his father had found the one argument that might actually work. Because Henry Morrison wasn't just threatening Felix or the Nash Empire, he was threatening Naomi and their unborn child. "I'll call you back," Felix said, ending the conversation just as Naomi emerged from the bedroom, her hair sleep-tousled and her face soft with the remnants of dreams. "Who was that?" she asked, moving to the coffee maker with the careful movements of a woman 6 months pregnant. "My father," Felix admitted. "Henry requested a meeting with him. He knows who I am now." Naomi's hand stilled on the coffee pot. "What does that mean for us?" "I don't know yet." What Felix didn't tell her was that Henry had already begun his campaign. While they were having breakfast, Henry Morrison was across town meeting with a private investigator and a public relations firm, crafting a narrative that would paint him as the wronged party and Felix as a predatory billionaire who had stolen a vulnerable pregnant woman. The first salvo came that afternoon in the form of a gossip column in the city's most read tabloid, Secret Billionaire. Love triangle Nash heir hides true identity while stealing tech mogul's pregnant fiancée. Felix found out about the article when his phone started ringing with calls from reporters, board members, and business associates. By evening, there were photographers stationed outside their apartment building, and Naomi couldn't even go to the mailbox without being bombarded with questions about her secret relationship with the mysterious Nash heir. "This is insane," she said, peering through the blinds at the crowd gathered on the street below. "Felix, how do we make this stop?" Felix was pacing the small living room, his phone buzzing constantly with calls he refused to answer. The peaceful life they had built was being torn apart, and there was nothing he could do to protect her from the chaos his identity had brought into their world. "We can't," he said finally. "Not as long as Henry is feeding the media stories." "Then what do we do?" Before Felix could answer, his phone rang again. This time it wasn't his father or a reporter. It was Harrison, the family butler. "Mr. Felix," Harrison's voice was urgent, "you need to know that Mr. Morrison has been making inquiries about Miss Williams. Personal inquiries, background checks, financial records, family history." "What kind of family history?" Felix asked, though something in his gut told him he already knew the answer. "The kind that suggests Miss Williams isn't quite who she appears to be either, sir." Felix looked at Naomi, who was still standing by the window, her hand protectively curved over her belly. There were so many secrets between them now, so many layers of truth that neither had revealed. "Harrison," Felix said slowly, "what exactly did Henry Morrison find out about Naomi?" "Perhaps, sir, that's a question you should ask Miss Williams herself." The call ended, leaving Felix staring at the woman he loved and realizing that the revelation of his identity might not be the biggest secret between them. "Naomi," he said carefully, "yesterday you said you needed to tell me something about your past, about why Henry thinks he can demand you come back to him." She turned away from the window, and Felix could see the war playing out across her face, the desire to finally tell him the truth, warring with the fear of how he might react. "You're not the only one who's been hiding something," she said quietly. "What do you mean?" Naomi moved to the couch and sat down heavily, her hands clasped in her lap. When she looked up at him, her dark eyes were filled with a mixture of love and terror. "Felix, when Henry said I wasn't some poor little girl who needed rescuing, he was right. When he said I came from something different than what you see here, he was right about that too. Naomi, whatever it is, just tell me." She took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice was steady despite the tears in her eyes. "My name is Naomi Williams," she said, "and I'm the sole heir to the Williams Holdings fortune. I'm worth approximately $72 billion. The number hit Felix like a physical blow. $72 billion, more than his family's empire. More than Henry Morrison could ever dream of having. Felix sank into the chair across from her, his mind reeling. You're richer than all of us. By a significant margin, Naomi confirmed. And Henry Morrison doesn't know. Nobody knows except my lawyers and financial advisors. I've been living on a trust fund allowance since I turned 18, but the full inheritance becomes mine when I turn 30 next year. Felix stared at her. This woman he thought he had been protecting and providing for, and realized that she could have bought and sold his entire life without a second thought. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. For the same reason you didn't tell me about Nash Global, she said. Because I wanted to be loved for who I am, not what I have. Because I've seen what that kind of money does to people, how it changes them. My parents died in a car accident when I was 16, and every relationship I've had since then has been tainted by what people want from me rather than what they feel for me. So when you met Henry, he thought I was just another beautiful woman he could impress with his millions. I never told him the truth because I wanted to see if he could love me without knowing what I was worth. Naomi's voice cracked slightly. Turns out he couldn't even do that. Felix was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. Finally, he looked up at her with something that might have been awe. So when Henry Morrison tried to shame you for leaving him, he said slowly, when he said you were living beneath your station with a community center worker, I was actually slumming it with a billionaire while being worth more than both of you combined. Naomi finished with a shaky laugh. The absurdity of the situation. 2 billionaires pretending to be ordinary people while fighting over a woman who was secretly richer than both of them struck them both at the same time. Felix started laughing first, and then Naomi joined him, and soon they were both collapsed on the couch, holding each other and laughing until tears streamed down their faces. We're idiots, Felix said, kissing her forehead. We're absolute idiots. The richest idiots in the city, Naomi agreed, but their laughter faded as the reality of the situation sank in. Henry Morrison was waging a public relations war against them, not knowing that he was actually fighting 2 people who could destroy him financially without breaking a sweat. What do we do now? Naomi asked. Felix looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not a billionaire heiress, but the woman who had saved him from a life of empty privilege, just as surely as he had saved her from the rain. The woman carrying his child, the woman he loved more than his own life. Now, he said, we stop hiding. From each other, from Henry, from the world. And we show him what it really means to wage war against the people we love. Outside, the photographers continued their vigil, waiting for the next chapter in what they thought was a simple love triangle. They had no idea they were about to witness the collision of 3 of the largest fortunes in the country, with love and family hanging in the balance. Chapter 8. The Second Secret Revealed. Power isn't about what you have, it's about what you choose to do with it. The grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel had never hosted an event quite like this one. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, while 500 of the most powerful figures in the tech industry mingled beneath soaring ceilings painted with Renaissance masterpieces. The annual Tech Innovation Gala brought together billionaires, celebrities, and politicians. But this year, the focus wasn't on the latest technological breakthroughs. Instead, every conversation seemed to center around the scandal that had dominated headlines for the past week. The love triangle between Henry Morrison, the mysterious Nash heir, and the woman caught between them. Naomi stood before her full-length mirror in the penthouse suite Felix had insisted they move to for security reasons, adjusting the flowing midnight blue gown that accommodated her 6.5-month pregnancy. The dress was a masterpiece of design, silk that seemed to shimmer like liquid starlight, with intricate beadwork that caught the light with every breath. It had cost more than most people's cars, but it was worth it for the way it made her feel, powerful, beautiful, and ready for battle. Behind her, Felix's reflection appeared in the mirror like something out of a fairy tale. He looked devastatingly handsome in his black tuxedo, the fabric perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders and lean frame. The transformation from community center worker to billionaire heir was complete, but the kindness in his brown eyes remained unchanged. "You don't have to do this," Felix said, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. "We could handle this privately. My lawyers could make Henry sign a non-disclosure agreement, pay him enough to disappear quietly." "No," Naomi said firmly, turning to face him. The movement sent ripples through the silk of her gown, and she watched Felix's breath catch as he took in her full beauty. Henry Morrison made this public. He wanted a media spectacle, and that's exactly what he's going to get. But this time, I'm writing the script. The plan they had developed over the past 3 days was elegant in its simplicity. Henry would expect them to hide, to avoid the public eye while the scandal raged in tabloids and gossip columns. Instead, they were going to walk into the most high-profile event of the year and control the narrative themselves. Tonight, the most powerful people in the country would learn exactly who Naomi Williams really was. Felix had officially resumed his position at Nash Global Industries 2 days ago, sending shockwaves through the business world. The prodigal heir's return had been the subject of countless articles, most of which painted him as an eccentric billionaire who had been slumming in poverty for his own amusement. The stock market had responded positively to his return, with Nash Global shares jumping 12% in a single day. "The car is waiting," Felix said, offering her his arm with the gallant gesture that had become second nature to him. "Then let's go make history," Naomi replied, and she meant it. The ride to the hotel was a study in controlled tension. Felix's security team had cleared the route, their black SUVs creating a protective convoy through the city streets. Photographers lined the sidewalks, hoping for a glimpse of the mysterious couple, but the tinted windows revealed nothing. They entered through a private entrance to avoid the crowds of reporters camped outside the main doors. But avoidance was not the plan. It was simply strategy. The moment they stepped into the ballroom, conversation stopped. 500 pairs of eyes turned to watch the Nash heir and his mysterious pregnant companion, the subjects of a week's worth of gossip and speculation, walking boldly into the lion's den. The sound of camera shutters was like machine gun fire, as society photographers captured every angle, every expression, every subtle detail of their arrival. Henry Morrison was already at the gala when they arrived, holding court near the bar with a group of tech executives and their wives. He looked handsome and confident in his custom tuxedo, playing the role of the successful bachelor who had been wronged by his faithless ex-fiancée. A blonde socialite hung on his arm, his date for the evening, clearly chosen to make Naomi jealous. When he spotted Felix and Naomi entering the ballroom, his smile became predatory, like a shark scenting blood in the water. "Game time," Felix murmured, his hand protective on the small of Naomi's back as they began to move through the crowd. The ballroom was a sea of power and wealth, tech moguls worth billions, venture capitalists who could make or break companies with a phone call, politicians whose decisions shaped global markets. Naomi recognized most of them from business magazines and news articles, but tonight she wasn't seeing them as distant figures of power. Tonight, she was their equal. Henry approached them within minutes, his public relations team and the blonde socialite flanking him like an entourage. Every movement was calculated for maximum impact, every word chosen to play to the audience of influential onlookers. "Naomi," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet section of the ballroom. His tone was perfectly pitched, hurt but magnanimous, the wounded lover who still cared about the woman who had betrayed him. "You look radiant. Pregnancy suits you." The comment drew murmurs from the surrounding crowd. Here was the first public interaction between the central figures in the scandal that had captivated the city. "Thank you," "Henry," she replied coolly, her voice carrying the authority she had inherited along with her billions. "You look well. I heard Morrison Industries stock has recovered somewhat since your announcement about the personal betrayal that's been affecting your leadership. It was a direct hit, delivered with surgical precision." Henry's stock price had indeed jumped when he'd gone public with the story, painting himself as a tragic figure betrayed by his pregnant fiancée. Investors had rallied around the narrative of a strong leader overcoming personal adversity, but the recovery had been modest at best. "I've always believed in being honest with my shareholders," Henry said, his smile never wavering despite the challenge in her words. "They deserve to know when personal matters might affect business performance. Transparency builds trust." "How thoughtful of you," Felix interjected, moving closer to Naomi in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "I'm sure they also appreciate knowing that their CEO's personal betrayal story conveniently coincided with the need to distract from those failed product launches last quarter. The Q3 numbers were particularly disappointing, weren't they?" Henry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his public relations training held firm. "Business has its ups and downs, Nash. I'm sure you understand that, having walked away from your family's empire for, what was it again? A spiritual journey?" The exchange was being watched by dozens of influential figures, each word analyzed for its strategic implications. This wasn't just a personal confrontation, it was corporate warfare played out in public. Before Henry could continue his attack, the evening's master of ceremonies announced that dinner would be served shortly. As the crowd began moving toward the dining room, Henry made his move. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the ballroom as he signaled to someone near the sound system. The music stopped abruptly, and conversations died as everyone turned to see what was happening. "Before we adjourn for dinner, I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." The silence that followed was electric with anticipation. Henry had commandeered the evening's program, turning what should have been a celebration of technological innovation into his personal platform for revenge. "As many of you know," Henry continued, stepping onto the small stage at the front of the ballroom with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards, "I've been dealing with some very personal challenges recently. The woman I loved, the woman I was planning to marry and start a family with, left me for another man while carrying my child." A murmur rippled through the crowd like a wave. Felix felt Naomi tense beside him, but her face remained perfectly composed, revealing nothing of the storm of emotions beneath the surface. "What you don't know," Henry continued, his voice rising with theatrical flair, "is that the man she left me for has been living a lie. Felix Nash, heir to one of the largest fortunes in the country, has been pretending to be a simple community center worker, manipulating a vulnerable pregnant woman by hiding his true identity." The crowd's murmur grew louder, a buzz of excitement and scandal that Henry fed off like a drug. This was exactly the kind of revelation that would dominate social media and business news for weeks, overshadowing any discussion of failed product launches or questionable business decisions. "But that's not even the most interesting part of this story," Henry said, pausing for dramatic effect as he surveyed his captive audience. "Because you see, Naomi Williams here has been keeping her own secrets." Felix felt his blood turn to ice. Henry couldn't possibly know about Naomi's inheritance. They had been so careful, so discreet. The Williams Holdings connection was buried beneath layers of trusts and shell companies, protected by the best lawyers money could buy. "I did some digging," Henry continued, his smile widening as he prepared to deliver what he believed would be the killing blow. "And it turns out our innocent victim isn't quite as innocent as she appears. Naomi Williams is the sole heir to Williams Holdings, a fortune that makes even the Nash empire look modest." Gasps echoed through the ballroom like gunshots. The revelation hit the crowd like a physical force, sending shockwaves through conversations and causing several people to actually step backward in surprise. Cameras flashed furiously as photographers captured Naomi's face, searching for any crack in her composure, any sign of the humiliation Henry expected to see. "So you see," Henry said triumphantly, spreading his arms wide as if embracing his victory. "This isn't a story about a billionaire taking advantage of a poor pregnant woman. This is a story about the three richest people in this city playing games with each other while lying to everyone else." The silence that followed was deafening, heavy with expectation and the weight of revealed secrets. Henry stood on the stage like a conquering hero, clearly expecting his revelation to destroy both Felix and Naomi's credibility and public sympathy. He had exposed their lies, shattered their carefully constructed images, and now he waited for them to crumble under the weight of public judgment. Instead, Naomi stepped forward. "You're absolutely right, Henry," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, calm and steady as mountain stone. "I'm the Williams Holdings heiress. I am worth considerably more than either you or Felix. And yes, I've been keeping that secret." She moved gracefully toward the stage, her midnight blue gown flowing around her like liquid starlight. Felix followed close behind, his hand never leaving the small of her back as they navigated through. The crowd that parted before them like the Red Sea. Every eye in the room was on her as she climbed the steps with the fluid grace of a woman who had been born to command attention. With steady hands, she took the microphone from Henry's suddenly nerveless fingers, her smile never wavering as she faced the assembled power brokers of American industry. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast ballroom, "let me tell you who I really am." The moment had come. No more hiding, no more secrets, no more pretending to be anything other than exactly who she was. Naomi Williams, billionaire heiress, was about to take control of her own story and change the course of her life forever. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. The moment of truth arrives when a queen must decide the fate of the man who cast her aside. The Williams estate sat on 50 acres of perfectly manicured grounds outside the city, a testament to 4 generations of accumulated wealth and power. Naomi had inherited the property along with everything else when she turned 25, but she had rarely visited it, preferring the anonymity of her smaller downtown apartment. Now 8 months pregnant and 3 weeks away from her due date, she had moved into the estate to prepare for the arrival of their child and their upcoming wedding. Felix found her in the library that morning, a room that housed over 10,000 books and served as the unofficial headquarters for Williams Holdings. She was reviewing wedding plans with their coordinator, her hand resting on her prominent belly as their baby moved restlessly inside her. The sight of her, radiant with pregnancy, powerful in her element, surrounded by the evidence of her family's legacy, still took his breath away. "The catering is confirmed," Naomi was saying, "and the florists will arrive at dawn to set up the gardens. Security has the guest list and—" She looked up as Felix entered, her face lighting up with the smile that had become his anchor in this new world of wealth and scrutiny. "Good morning, handsome." "Good morning, beautiful." Felix kissed her forehead, marveling as he did every day at the fact that this incredible woman had chosen to love him. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm carrying a future Olympic gymnast," she replied, laughing as the baby kicked particularly forcefully. "I think he or she is excited about the wedding tomorrow." Their wedding had been planned for 3 months, ever since the night Felix had proposed at the gala. The media attention had been intense, but they had learned to navigate it together, presenting a united front against the constant speculation about their relationship and their combined wealth. The wedding itself would be held in the estate's gardens, a relatively intimate affair with 200 guests, including family, friends, and the most important figures from both the Nash and Williams business empires. "Ma'am," The wedding coordinator, an elegant woman named Patricia, who had been organizing high society events for 30 years, looked up from her notes. "There's been a development regarding the security situation." "What kind of development?" Felix asked, immediately alert. "Mr. Henry Morrison has requested a meeting with Ms. Williams. Today, he says it's urgent and concerns the welfare of the child." Naomi and Felix exchanged glances. They hadn't heard from Henry since the night of the gala 6 months ago, when his public attempt to humiliate them had backfired so spectacularly. Morrison Industries had struggled in the aftermath, with investors questioning Henry's judgment and several major clients withdrawing their contracts. The last they had heard, Henry was facing a potential takeover from a larger tech firm. "He's here?" Naomi asked. "At the front gate, ma'am." "Security is holding him there pending your instructions." Felix's jaw tightened. "On the day before our wedding? What could he possibly want?" "Only one way to find out," Naomi said, struggling to her feet. Felix immediately moved to help her, his hands gentle on her arms as she rose. "Patricia, could you give us a moment?" After the coordinator left, Felix turned to face his fiancée with concern evident in his brown eyes. "Naomi, you don't have to see him. Especially not now, not when you're so close to your due date." "I know I don't have to," she replied, moving to the window that overlooked the front drive. In the distance, she could see Henry's familiar silver BMW waiting at the security checkpoint. "But maybe it's better to face whatever this is now, before the wedding, before the baby comes. I want to start our marriage with all of this behind us." Felix nodded, understanding her reasoning, even as every protective instinct in his body screamed against allowing Henry anywhere near her. "I'll be with you," he said firmly. "I know you will." 20 minutes later, they sat in the estate's formal sitting room, a space that had been designed to intimidate and impress with its soaring ceilings, priceless artwork, and antique furniture that belonged in a museum. Naomi had chosen this room deliberately, wanting Henry to see her in her element, surrounded by the evidence of a wealth and power that dwarfed his own. When Henry Morrison was escorted in by security, the change in him was immediately apparent. The confident, arrogant man who had stood on the stage at the gala was gone, replaced by someone who looked haunted and desperate. His expensive suit couldn't hide the weight he had lost, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and relentless stress. "Naomi," he said, his voice barely above a whisper as he took in her appearance. She was dressed simply in a flowing maternity dress, but there was no hiding her pregnancy now, or the radiant happiness that seemed to emanate from her. "You look odd. You look incredible." "Hello, Henry," she replied calmly, gesturing to the chair across from the sofa where she and Felix sat. "Please sit down." Henry remained standing, his eyes darting around the opulent room before settling back on her face. "I need to talk to you. About the baby, about everything." "Then talk," Felix said, his voice carefully controlled. For the first time, Henry seemed to really see Felix sitting beside Naomi, his hand resting protectively on her knee. The sight of their obvious intimacy and shared happiness seemed to cause him physical pain. "You know about my company," Henry said abruptly. "You know it's failing." "We heard," Naomi confirmed. "I'm sorry, Henry. I know how much Morrison Industries meant to you." "Meant to me?" Henry laughed bitterly. "It was everything to me. My father's legacy, my life's work, my identity. And it's gone. The board voted me out last week. The company is being absorbed by Tech Global, and I'm walking away with a fraction of what it was worth 6 months ago." "What does this have to do with us?" Felix asked. Henry's gaze swung to him, and for a moment the old arrogance flared in his eyes. "It has everything to do with you, both of you. My company started failing the night you made me look like a fool at that gala. When Naomi revealed who she really was, when the whole world saw that I had thrown away the richest woman in America for what, pride? Stupidity? "You threw her away because you didn't trust her," Felix corrected. Because you accused her of carrying another man's child when you knew damn well it was yours. Yes, Henry's voice cracked with emotion. Yes, I was wrong about that. I was wrong about everything. And now, he gestured helplessly around the room. Now look where we are. She's living in a palace, preparing to marry a man who loves her enough to give up his fortune for her. And I'm nothing. Naomi watched him carefully, seeing the broken man beneath the familiar features. This was the moment she had been unconsciously preparing for, since the night he had thrown her out into the rain. The moment when Henry Morrison would finally understand what he had lost. "What do you want?" "Henry," she asked gently. "I want—" Henry's voice broke completely, and he sank into the chair as if his legs could no longer support him. "I want to see my child. I want to be part of his life, or her life. I know I have no right to ask. I know I destroyed any claim I had to your love or your trust, but that baby, that's my child too." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and desperate and completely honest. For the first time since she had known him, Henry Morrison was speaking from his heart instead of his ego. Felix felt Naomi's hand tighten on his knee, and he squeezed it reassuringly. This decision was hers to make, and whatever she chose, he would support her completely. "Go on," Naomi said quietly. "I've lost everything," Henry continued, tears streaming down his face now. "My company, my reputation, my sense of who I am. But I can't lose my child too. I can't have him grow up thinking his father didn't want him, didn't fight for the chance to know him." "And what exactly are you fighting with?" Naomi asked, her voice still gentle but with an edge of steel. "You have no money, no company, no power. What could you possibly offer a child?" Henry looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw a desperation that was almost painful to witness. "Love," he said simply. "Regret for not being the man you needed me to be. A promise to do better, to be better, for the chance to know my child. The same child you said wasn't yours," Felix interjected. "The child whose mother you threw out into a storm." "I know what I did," Henry said, turning to face Felix directly. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But I'm asking anyway because that child is the only family I have left in the world." Naomi was quiet for a long moment, her hand moving unconsciously to her belly, where the baby was moving restlessly, as if sensing the tension in the room. When she spoke, her voice was calm and measured, carrying the authority of a woman who had been born to command fortunes and make decisions that affected thousands of lives. "You want to know what you're going to get, Henry?" she said, her dark eyes meeting his directly. "You want my forgiveness? You want access to my child? You want to be part of this family?" Henry nodded desperately, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time since he had entered the room. Naomi leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to just above a whisper, and when she spoke, every word carried the weight of absolute finality. "Let me tell you exactly what you're going to get." Chapter 10, The Queen's Mercy. The greatest revenge is not destroying your enemy. It's rising so high above them that their hatred can no longer reach you. The silence in the sitting room stretched, like a held breath, as Naomi looked down at Henry Morrison, this man who had once held her heart and broken it so completely. 8 months pregnant, surrounded by the evidence of her family's power, with the love of her life beside her and their child moving beneath her heart, she had never felt more certain of who she was or what she needed to say. The weight of generational wealth pressed down around them. Portraits of William's ancestors gazed down from gilded frames, their eyes seeming to witness this moment of judgment. The very air seemed thick with the gravity of what was about to unfold, as if the ghosts of her forebears were gathering to watch their heir deliver justice to the man who had wronged her so deeply. "You want to know what you're going to get, Henry?" she said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that came from understanding her own worth. "I'll tell you exactly what you deserve." Henry's face was pale with hope and terror, waiting for her judgment like a man standing before the throne of a queen who held his entire future in her hands. His expensive suit couldn't hide the trembling in his hands, the desperate need that radiated from every pore. "You're going to get the truth," Naomi continued, her voice steady and implacable. "The truth that you destroyed our relationship not through one moment of anger, but through months of never really seeing me. You loved the idea of me, beautiful, grateful, impressed by your success, but you never bothered to learn who I actually was." Her hand moved to her belly, where their child seemed to respond to the sound of her voice with gentle movements, as if the baby could sense the importance of this moment. "You're going to get the knowledge that this child will grow up knowing exactly what kind of man their biological father is," she said, each word chosen with surgical precision. "They'll know that when their mother needed protection and care, you threw her out into a storm. They'll know that when given the choice between trust and suspicion, you chose suspicion. They'll know that you valued your pride more than your family." Henry's face crumpled with each revelation, but Naomi wasn't finished. Years of hurt, months of healing, and the fierce protective love of a mother-to-be all came together in this moment of absolute honesty. "But they'll also know that real love exists," she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "They'll know what it looks like when a man chooses kindness over cruelty, service over dominance, trust over fear. They'll grow up watching Felix love me with his whole heart, watching him choose our family every single day, not because he has to, but because he wants to." She turned to look at Felix, and the love in her eyes was so brilliant it seemed to light up the entire room, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. In that gaze was everything they had built together, every tender moment, every act of service, every choice to put love before pride. "They'll call Felix Daddy because that's what he'll be in every way that matters," she said, her voice soft with emotion, but carrying to every corner of the opulent room. "He'll be the one who reads bedtime stories and teaches them to ride a bike and holds them when they're sick. He'll be the one who shows them what real strength looks like, not the kind that dominates others, but the kind that lifts them up." Felix's eyes filled with tears as he listened to her words, understanding that she was giving him the greatest gift he could ever receive, not just her love, but her complete trust in their future together. In this moment, surrounded by all the trappings of wealth and power, what mattered most was the family they were creating through choice rather than chance. "As for you, Henry," Naomi said, turning back to the broken man before her, "you'll get what you've always had, exactly what you've earned through your own choices." "Please," Henry whispered, his voice breaking like glass. "I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but that baby is my blood. Don't I have some rights?" Naomi's voice sharpened slightly, cutting through his plea like a blade. "You want to talk about rights? You gave up your rights the night you accused me of being a liar and a gold digger. You gave up your rights when you threw a pregnant woman out of your home because your ego was more important than her safety." She leaned back against the sofa, Felix's hand finding hers and squeezing gently, lending her his strength for what came next. "But here's what I'm willing to give you, Henry, because I believe children should know the truth about where they come from," she said, her voice taking on the measured cadence of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. "When this child is old enough to understand, maybe 16, maybe 18, I'll tell them about you. I'll tell them they have a biological father named Henry Morrison, who wasn't ready to be a parent when they were born." Henry's eyes flickered with something that might have been hope, the first glimmer of light in the darkness that had consumed him. "If they want to meet you then, if they want to have a relationship with you, that will be their choice to make as an adult with full knowledge of what happened between us," Naomi continued. "But until that day, you have no claim on this child, no place in our family, and no power over our happiness." The finality in her voice was absolute, carrying the weight of generations of William's authority. This was not a negotiation or a discussion. It was a pronouncement from someone who held all the power in the room. "That's it?" Henry asked, his voice hollow and desperate. "That's all I get?" Maybe a chance to meet my own child when they're practically grown. That's more than you deserve, Felix said quietly, his voice carrying years of accumulated protectiveness, and more than you gave her when she needed you most. Naomi studied Henry's face, seeing the complete devastation there, the utter collapse of a man who had lost everything that mattered. For a moment, just a moment, she felt something that might have been pity for the broken shell of the man she had once planned to marry. "Henry," she said softly, her voice gentler but no less firm, "I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this to protect my child. They deserve to grow up in a home filled with love and security, not the chaos and bitterness that would come from forcing a relationship with someone who has already proven they can't be trusted with our hearts." "But I've changed," Henry said desperately, tears streaming down his face. "Losing everything, losing you, it's made me see how wrong I was, how terrible I was to you. I know I can be better." "Then prove it," Naomi interrupted, her voice carrying the ring of challenge and hope in equal measure. "Not to me, not to this child, but to yourself. Build a life worth living. Find a way to be happy that doesn't depend on taking something away from someone else. Learn to love in a way that puts someone else's needs before your own ego." She struggled to her feet, Felix immediately rising to help her, his movements automatic and protective. Standing there in her family's ancestral home, 8 months pregnant with the child of the man she truly loved, Naomi Williams had never looked more like the queen she was born to be. "If you do that, if you become the man you should have been, then maybe someday our child will be proud to know you're their biological father," she said, her voice carrying the weight of possibility and redemption. "But until that day, Henry Morrison, you are nothing more than a stranger to this family." Henry looked up at her, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in his life, not as a prize to be won or a possession to be controlled, but as a force of nature, a woman of such strength and grace that he could hardly believe he had once thought himself worthy of her love. "I loved you," he whispered, his voice broken and raw with grief for everything he had lost through his own choices. "No," Naomi said gently but firmly, the words carrying the finality of absolute truth. "You loved the idea of owning me. You loved how I made you feel about yourself. But you never loved me enough to trust me, to protect me, to put my needs before your pride. Felix loves me enough to give up billions of dollars just to know that what we have is real. That's the difference between possession and love." She moved toward the door, Felix's protective hand on the small of her back, their movement graceful despite her advanced pregnancy. At the threshold, she paused to look back at Henry one final time, her expression mixing sadness with resolution. "The greatest revenge isn't destroying you, Henry," she said, her voice carrying across the opulent room like a benediction. "It's this, my complete and total happiness without you. It's the family we're building, the love we share, the life we're creating together. It's the fact that you no longer have the power to hurt me, because I've found someone who would die before he'd let anyone harm me." Henry watched them leave. These two people who had found in each other everything he had been too proud and foolish to recognize when he had the chance. As the door closed behind them with soft finality, he was left alone in the opulent sitting room, with nothing but the echoes of his own choices and the devastating realization that the greatest love of his life was walking away from him forever. Outside in the marble-floored hallway, Naomi leaned against Felix, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the confrontation, but also strangely lightened, as if she had set down a burden she had been carrying for months. "Are you okay?" he asked, his arms encircling her carefully, his hands protective on her back. "I'm perfect," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "I'm finally free." That evening, as they walked through the rose gardens, where their wedding would take place in less than 12 hours, Naomi felt the baby move strongly beneath her heart. Felix's hand covered hers on her belly, and she smiled at the man who had proven that love could be both gentle and fierce, both humble and powerful. "Do you think I was too harsh?" she asked, though she already knew her answer. "I think you were exactly as merciful as he deserved," Felix replied, his voice carrying the conviction of someone who had watched her wrestle with this decision. "You could have destroyed him completely with your resources and connections. Instead, you gave him the truth and a chance to earn something better, above them." Stars began to appear in the darkening sky, like diamonds scattered across black velvet. And in the distance, the sounds of wedding preparations created a gentle backdrop of hope and promise. Tomorrow, they would be married before 300 guests. In 2 weeks, their child would be born into a world of love and security. And Henry Morrison would fade into the background of their lives like a storm that had passed, leaving behind only the knowledge that they had weathered it together and emerged stronger than before. "I love you, Felix Nash," Naomi whispered as they stood together in their garden, their hands intertwined over the life they had created together, their hearts full of plans for the future. "I love you too, Naomi Williams," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of promise and devotion. "Today, tomorrow, and for all the days of our lives." And in that moment, surrounded by the beauty they had built together and the promise of the future growing beneath her heart, Naomi understood that the greatest victory was not defeating your enemies. It was building a life so beautiful that their hatred could no longer touch it. The rain that had brought them together seemed like a lifetime ago. Now, under a canopy of stars and surrounded by gardens that would bloom for their wedding, they had found their kingdom in the love they shared, and nothing would ever tear it apart again.